computers. All right, everybody. Welcome to the American Made and Page show. Thank you for joining us here today. I just want to apologize briefly for last week. Some stuff came up, so I wasn't actually able to kind of keep this thing going. But we are back again this week. I believe this is episode, what is it, 112, which is pretty crazy. Now that we've kind of scaled back to doing it, once a week, it kind of gives us the opportunity to talk about these things live and jump into it. So yeah, as people start trickling in here, you guys can leave your comments. You can give us feedback as we do this. One of the nice things about being able to do this live is to actually be able to interact with people. So yeah, we'll just kind of see how it goes here. I don't know how many people will actually join, but it looks like you're gone also. So are you going to come back so we can
no, I'm here.
Awesome.
I feel like drinking on camera.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. Let's start this off because the title of today's show is going to be about absolute immunity, impeachment. We're going to dive into a lot of the things that we've always talked about regarding conservatism, how impeachment is unconstitutional, a lot of those random things. But let's start off and talk a little bit about homelessness, right? And tie that all into it. You mentioned that homelessness has a lot to do with this. And I feel like we can speak on that just as a beginning thing because it's a very prevalent thing in a lot of progressive cities, right? New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Having lived there for about 6 years or so, I felt like it only got worse and worse. And let's talk a little bit more about why that's important and how that ties into what we're going to discuss here.
Into everything. Yeah. Well, because as you know, I'm a new Christian. And it always bothered me. Like, this was a big reason why I was never, I couldn't accept Christ because of, the homeless situation. And it always bothered me. It's like, how come these churches don't help the people? How come they don't help the homeless? Mm-hmm. Like we were talking off air, and you noted how LA has the biggest homeless population.
Right.
But then LA has so many churches. They have so many Catholic churches, Baptist churches. They have, Tim Stories is one of the most famous pastors down in LA. Mm-hmm. And he's like a mega church pastor. And his parishioners included like Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So and it always disgusted me how these guys had all these celebrities, all these huge people, but yet they let LA become the biggest slum in the country. Same thing in San Francisco, but San Francisco with their gayness literally drove out most Christian, churches, and the churches that do survive are really small. But anyway, so I always blamed the churches. Why not blame God for the homeless situation? Because it's the church's responsibility. But when the counselor and myself, we were suing, like I told you earlier, and I'm pretty sure the audience is well aware, we sue governments. Mm-hmm. So I just recently discovered that the churches by law cannot help the homeless. It is against the law for churches to house the homeless.
Really?
They won't even feed them. If a church wanted to feed the homeless, it is extremely difficult. There's a lot of red tape you have to go through. Mm-hmm. And I like what these guys did. I'm going to share this article. Let's see.
You have to use the option at the bottom.
Yeah, I'm
still getting familiar with this system too. But how does this relate to what we're talking about today with impeachment and absolute immunity?
There we go. Yeah, well, because share, because I want people to, I don't know, is it up? Let me see.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so this is real. This is a real thing. From the Observer in Texas.
You gotta close the little tab because it popped up. So you gotta, yeah.
Crap. Let me see. There we go. Can you see it now or no? Oh, this I get it. Close this thing.
Yeah.
Boom.
So
Okay. I was like, okay, there we go. See, this article right here, pretty much in Dallas, churches break the law to shelter homeless people on freezing nights. That's a legitimate thing. Like this, like the church has to break the law, right? So, and remember how I told you, how come these pastors don't fight and how come they don't sue for their rights? Because, I mean, doesn't it make sense? Okay, we could stop. People have enough time to get this, right?
yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop screen sharing. Okay, but remember, I said, how come these churches just lay over? You know, like lay down and roll over, and how come they don't fight? Why don't these churches fight? It's like literally that's their job. You know, because when you think about it, a pastor has mastered the commandments of Jesus. You
Well,
know,
no, but I always thought, let's focus on that a little bit, because I always thought historically that churches were allowed to house homeless people. Like that was a thing. Like that
no,
was,
they're
no?
not. No, that's why I sent that you know, that's why I sent that link, because it's a real legitimate thing. Instead of like, you know, posting the laws and
Mhm.
you know, the administrative policies, you know, I found a news article, so that's why I shared that article. But that's a legitimate thing. It is against the law for churches to house the homeless or even to help them, you know, let alone you know, house them. If you help somebody, you have to be quote unquote licensed. And so to address what you had just said more specifically, what can a church do to defend themselves against the government when they get sued? Like that guy, like that crazy pastor down in New York that was talking crazy, and the church and the government went after them, right? For hate speech or something like that, or whatever he was saying.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
I'll be a little bit honest. I'm fairly ignorant on like what churches are actually able to do in regard. I know that they're tax exempt. I know that they're 501c3s, and I know that they don't get audited very often. But I'm not really sure, like, in the eyes of government, what they're able to do, because this is news to me, right? Would you say that the reason why there is a lot of homeless in a lot of these cosmopolitan cities is because churches can no longer take in the homeless, or is it something else? Because this is news to
well,
me, so I'm letting you do the talking. I'm
okay,
not
well,
really.
see, but this is just a theory because I'm a new Christian, right? So, well, I mean, because we could break it down. Like, I'll break down like the homeless situation, but you know, in a little bit. But the thing is that always bothered me was how come these churches don't help? I just discovered recently that it's against the law for churches to help. So
Huh.
my whole thing is, it's like, wait a minute, how could these churches see now? Now that I know this, that it's against the law, that's why I, you know, put that article. Because this is Dallas, Texas. In Texas, it's against in Dallas, Texas, not Austin. In Dallas, Texas, it is
Mhm.
against the law for churches to house the homeless, you know, to house the homeless. It makes no sense. Dallas, in theory, is a conservative city. It's a
Right.
Christian city, but yet somehow, some way, those politicians are stopping the churches from doing their duty.
Hmm. Do you
Now,
think
it's not a legal duty, but you know, as being a Christian, you want to help the homeless, whoever it is. You want to help them because that's how you get them into your churches.
And so big picture wise, how does this tie into absolute immunity and impeachment? Because I want to tie the thing together so I can give my perspective. I still fail to see how this actually.
Okay, so check this out. So you would think, why would a church even start if their job is to help your neighbor, love your neighbor, also? So that means including housing the homeless. How can you have a church when the government is telling you what you can and cannot do? Housing the homeless is part of being a Christian if you have a church and you have the ability to house your neighbors, those people that are down on their luck or whatever.
Hmm.
They are stopping everybody from actually believing the church is a force of good. Think about that.
Right.
What is important when you see a church? Like, think about the importance of this visual. You see a pretty big church,
Hmm.
like Joel Olstein's church. It's he's in San Antonio, I believe, and it's
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Well,
against the law for him to house these homeless people. So if you have like 100 homeless people, or you have some drug dealers dealing drugs across the street from your church or in the parking lot. No, but let's just say across the street. So if you have that in your neighborhood, because a lot of churches are in bad neighborhoods or whatever.
mhm.
So if the church people cannot do anything, cannot go and I don't want to say preach, but in theory, a good pastor would reach out to those people and say, hey, look, I'm not going to call the cops on, but I want you to come in and just listen to what we're saying and let me help you. You know, just understand why dealing drugs or why, you know, laying in the street is a bad thing. You know what I mean? Like I keep want to say prophesizing, but that's not what I don't know what you call it, but
I
whatever.
think, well, I think now that spurred another memory, right? Because this is my theory, and I think after hearing you elaborate on that, this is my thought on why we're not actually allowed to do that. Because I remember when, I think, what was it, a hurricane or something hit Texas or whatnot, and Joel
Yeah.
Osteen refused to like house a lot of homeless people at that time. I think it was a flood or something, some natural disaster. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he got a lot of backlash for doing that, because I think typically what people expect is, you know, the church to be a place where people can gather if they're homeless or if they're down and out. Well, I want to correct you on the purpose of the church, and the purpose of the church is not specifically to help people. It's actually to get the gospel out. That's the main reason. But you're right. You know, helping people is something
That's part
that
of
is
it.
to be expected. I think it's because homelessness, if we tie this back to progressive ideology in the context of conservatism, is when people are actually at their most absolute helpless, right? Because think about your perception when it comes to a homeless person. I mean, you live in San Francisco, you know this better than anybody, right? When we think about homeless people, we don't even actually treat them like people anymore. And when you talk about how, okay, if a church can't even protect its homeless, if it can't even you know, take care of people that have sort of been cast aside in society, you know, they can't get a job, they can't do whatnot, or they might be mentally ill. Don't you think that that's also just a violation of somebody's Second Amendment? Because when we talk about the Second Amendment, because this is where the connection comes in, right? We always got to draw the line. What does it really mean, right? You know, the First Amendment is to essentially, you talk about things, you have the right to free speech, to assemble. The Second Amendment is not just about that. It's about are you listening?
Yeah, no, 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 no.
Okay. What I'm
I don't
saying is,
want to cut you off.
you know how people
You said two things.
typically think of guns, people typically think of you know, making sure that your firearms are protected, but it's actually not that. It means the preservation of life. It means to keep people alive and to sustain them, and you have a right to your life, you know, because that is your right. And I believe that the reason why churches, which are really, I guess, the only organizations that will voluntarily help homeless people, is because of that very reason, is because that those people are no longer viewed as people that are worth taking care of, or, you know, deeming their lives as valuable, right? And so that's an effort for governments, especially in progressive cities, to control people, is because if you can demean a human being and you can belittle them and make them feel like their life isn't valuable, then it's a lot easier to actually control people that way.
But
You desensitize people to their neighbors. That's my bottom
no,
statement.
no, but it's
It took me
exactly.
20 minutes to think about that, but the reason why I was kind of silent was I wasn't really sure. It's because there's no longer a consideration for people who are different from you, who are also maybe your neighbor, right?
Yeah. No, but see, but let me I'm gonna cut you off really quick. But let's go back to what you said initially. The church's job is to spread the gospel, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But what is the motivation for the public to even want to go to a church to even hear the gospel if they automatically think that the church or is a is a bunch of hypocrites? Think about it. That's why the visual, that's why I said just look at the visual. When you have drug dealers or homeless people like a mile away from that church, if you have to drive past a homeless encampment to
Mm-hmm.
get to church, or a bunch of drug dealers, what does that say, like subconsciously, to the person or the people walking past that church? You know what I mean? Like in San Francisco, there's a really big fancy church on Geary and Geary and Franklin, big
Uh-huh.
giant church. But to get there, you gotta walk through mountains of just dirty people. And that's the thing. When you walk past that church, you go, wow, that's a really nice church. But then, most people are going to say, man, that's messed up. Look at this big fancy church. They could help these homeless people if they want. And they automatically think, F this church, because they're not doing their job. But the people don't know that it's against the law. And that's part of the reason why it's against the law. It's against the law to stop the churches or to destroy the reputation of the churches. Because if the church's reputation is destroyed, why would anybody seek to listen to the gospel from that church?
That's a good point. I never thought of it that way, but yeah,
it just came to my head when I listened to you.
Yeah, but
because if I listened to you, I could actually understand.
Yeah, like, and the thing is, I remember when we talked about this a while back, and I think it's worth bringing up again. Talking about homeless, and then we'll tie it all together. I know we always do, but there's also different types of homeless people, right? This is something that you don't really hear a lot about. I've worked with homeless people. I know you have as well. And that, remember when we used to talk about 3 different types of homeless people? It was like the runaway kids, like the drug hippie kids being one of them, kind of actually spoiled kids in a way, right? And it's weird saying that, but actually, once you get to know some homeless people, you realize like some of these people are just runaway kids, right? So that's one grouping of homeless people, which is like, the hippies, the druggies, the ones that are kind like they have a dog with them, and they intentionally want to be homeless. There was that New York Times special about like, oh, these are the humans of New York, the homeless kids, and they're really just runaway kids. They're kids that didn't get along with their parents, or they don't want to get a job, or they don't want to go to school, some funny, funky reason for whatnot. And then there's the second class of homeless people, which is people who are just down and out. They're temporarily homeless, right? So what I mean by that is, say you lost your job or whatnot, and you're just out, like you got evicted, and you are fully capable of working and you can make things happen, but you're just in a bad. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. People are trickling so slowly, but but you know what I'm saying, right? There's the second class of homeless person, which is just people who are temporarily homeless, not because they like are mentally ill or anything, but they just had a bad stroke of luck and now they've got to deal with homelessness. There are people that are even sort of going through a divorce who would be temporarily homeless because of all the garbage that they deal with. And then there's that third class of homeless person, which is, I guess we could talk about this a little bit more, which is the people who legitimately are mentally handicapped, where it's like, it's just they're maybe mentally ill or they're drug addicted, or to the point where they can't really function properly in society. And I know that there's all kinds of ins and outs, but those are the 3 major groups that I've encountered. And we've always talked about that a little bit more, because I think, being in an observable progressive city like that, you want to know the funny thing too is that people tend to actually group like illegal immigrants and homeless together. And you want to know what's really messed up about this when you think about it from a progressive lens, is that the people that live in neighborhoods like San Francisco and Los Angeles group illegal immigrants and homeless people together, yet the government will actually give illegal immigrants more benefits than they would to homeless people. So that's really funny how that actually works.
Yeah, well, but I'm I just kind of want to go back into the 3 groups we were talking about. Technically, there's 4. Like how when I break it down, I would say 4. Like, of course, like you're spot on with retarded people, which is developmentally disabled or mentally ill, but for sake of time, I'll say retarded. But there's
some people might get offended by you saying that, but anyway, go ahead. Not a politically correct show, but anyways, go ahead.
But like Robert Tech 85 actually was pretty good with this like parents die or being lazy is one or whatever. But that all of that, like death of a parent or losing your job or just simply being lazy, that would be people who just hit a rough patch, or people who just need a little bit, temporarily need money. So if your
Mhm.
mom dies or your, dad dies, like if both parents die when you're like 16 and you got no place to go, well, you just need some cash to until you can find a job and get on your feet. It might take 6 months, a year, for a 16-year-old to get on his feet, but that person could be homeless for that reason. So that in itself is a separate group. And then, of course, you have your drug addicts, but that's a separate group of people. Like the people who suffer from addiction and
Mhm.
lose their hope from addiction, that's totally, that is a separate group of people because they need a different type of solution. So for every group that we talk about requires a very different approach to get them off the streets. And then, but the one that I really want to talk about that you said was those stupid kids who are homeless because they think it's cool. Like seriously, in San Francisco, they are given pets. They're like, it doesn't matter if it's a cat, a dog, or an iguana. They will give homeless people a pet for emotional support. When you get your drug needles, they'll
Yeah.
also give you a pet. And I'm thinking, how is a homeless person going to give food to this animal? It's like this is like animal cruelty giving it to these people. But anyway, but this is why I really wanted to talk about the homelessness because of the solutions. But
Mhm.
those solutions, okay, so uh, not talking about the mentally ill or the developmentally disabled, because I don't know if people even know what developmentally disabled means. But
Mhm.
it's a form of retardation. There's 4 types of retardation. We spoke about this before in previous episodes, but just to be real quick, because now I can see that people are listening. There's there's the mild retardation. There's moderately, retarded, the severely retarded, and the profoundly retarded. So there's 4 levels. When you're profoundly and severely retarded, there is no way you can take care of yourself, none whatsoever.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's the same thing when you're moderately or mildly retarded. It's you can function, but you can't really live in society without 24-hour supervision because if your IQ, because to be moderately retarded, your IQ has to be lower than 80, because 80 to 60 is mild. 60, 60 to, well, I say 50 to 60 is moderate retardation, and
Mhm.
between 60 to 7 is mildly retarded. Being mildly retarded. But when you're at
Sure.
that level, you really do need somebody to always be there with you 24/7, not like on you all the time, like constantly telling you what to do. But you do need supervision. Like you can maybe work at Toys R Us. Oh, they're out of business, but stocking shelves at like at Safeway. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like they can do that with supervision. I don't want to call them like nurses, but they should have somebody who understands psychiatric disorders and whatnot,
Mhm.
or developmental disabilities, and they should be able to work with those people. See, now that solution for homeless people that are on the streets, that can't be handled by the church. So let's take that one group out altogether, because
Okay.
that has nothing to do with the church. That has nothing to do with God or Jesus or none of that. That has nothing to do with it. When you're born with those disabilities, that's not because God punished anybody. You can't pray that away. It's just a fact of life. That's
Mhm.
how we were designed. That's how God made us. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just, but it does show us like how can we care for these people humanely, and that is a government job. That's when the government should handle and deal with homeless people when they're either developmentally disabled or
Mhm.
mentally ill. But let's just take that all out.
Okay.
So now with all the other aspects of being homeless, those are issues the churches must take charge of. So it's because people don't know the gospel. One of these, I forgot who, but I think it was Vicious E was saying, "Oh, God is a fiction. He's total fiction. It's everybody believes the church is after this, whatever, quoting me." But the thing is, it's not fiction. It's people really don't understand. I never read the Bible until you told me to. But anyway, but you know what I mean? Until you read it, then you know it's like, holy smokes, this is really accurate. It's amazing how accurate this Bible is and applicable to modern times. But anyway, so I understand why people believe that. And it really is because the church today in 2019 or 2020 literally has no, I mean, what do they do in our societies today?
Well, so I don't even want to get into it with different churches because
It's a rhetorical question. Let's not talk about it. But when,
yeah, I mean, we could go into the purpose, what a church should be, whatnot. That's all separate from the point, you know. I do want to talk a little bit more specifically about how this relates to.
Yeah. So let me get back into that. So when you are dealing with the homeless situation, you have to ask yourself, how did it happen? Because if you don't understand the how, then we will never understand why it's happening. So how it happened was the government, the local government. See, because this is what people have to understand. We could all celebrate Trump or Obama or whoever and say, oh, great. You know, like we get into our little gang wars and Obama, Trump, you know, blah, 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 blah. But that's just all smoke and mirrors. The president of the United States has very little to do with how a city runs their life.
Okay, so keep going.
San Francisco is, trust me, as far away from anything conservative than you could ever imagine. And you know, because you lived in Oakland, which is its twin ugly sister. You know what I mean? Oakland is like the ugly stepchild of the Bay. And you lived there for 6 years, so you know this. When you look at how every city puts every single person under a microscope just to live, then you start to wonder, what's the president going to do? Well, the president doesn't do anything. And every city mayor, every city council knows this. So every single city council across the United States, for whatever reasons, made it illegal for churches to do what they were meant to do, which is the second commandment of Jesus. And if you can't do the second commandment of Jesus, then they have effectively destroyed and regulated your religion. So go ahead.
What I'm saying, that's already happened, and that's actually to be expected, you know. But I thought that there was something about sort of reducing life, right, and belittling life that had to do with impeachment, with immunity as a whole. And I'll be honest, right, I haven't been following it as closely. But what does that have to say in the broad context of constitutionalism, right?
Okay, now let's go back to because I don't want to get off this the homelessness and how the churches were, you know, cut from the knees, right? So we got to ask ourselves, how did the local governments go up against the First Amendment? See, think about it. If a church cannot help their people, if they can't help the people, isn't that the state stopping religion? Yeah, because that's part of your religion. Part of your religion is to, because like that article I posted up, the guys in Dallas were like, it's freezing, we're going to open our doors. The law be damned, and we're just going to help. So, right. But that's the thing. Can you imagine arresting your pastor because of that? How is that even remotely possible? And this is and you know, this is like a big 30-minute buildup. But the reason why they can do it is because every single government employee, not just politician, every single government employee has absolute immunity. You cannot sue these people at all.
Oh, it took 30 minutes to get to that point, but
yeah, because I wanted to break it down that way. So
I think you're right, because here's what I've witnessed, and this is the problem with the Civil Rights Act, is that it may discourage discrimination, right? It may discourage a lot of the friction as to the common things that you could sue people over or say you can't do it, but it actually exempts the government from doing so. And so we defined this last time, in which, like, when we talk about people, there's really only two absolute terms, which is person and property or something like that, right? And it all comes down to how you define it, which is really funny because now that you mention that, when you are a government employee or you're a government worker, which relates to all of this, First Amendment rights actually don't even apply, so to speak, or they do apply, but like it's really hard to get fired when you work for the government. You know what I mean? Like it's really and that's one of the reasons. Like I feel like if you worked at the DMV, you have free speech, right? Say, because you're granted your First Amendment right. Therefore, you could say anything that you want. And in the private sector, people could let you go for being distasteful, right? For having a conflict of interest. But I don't even think that exists if you're a government employee. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, because you're right about that.
It's a whole lot worse than what you could even imagine. Okay, I'm gonna pull up some. Well, I'm not gonna share it.
Well, don't pull it up because that's complicated. But just what are you referring to?
No, like I'm gonna because when like again, I'm not scripturally sound, but I honestly feel like I don't need to be, because I'm not the one spreading the gospel.
Well, at some point you should be, but go on.
Well, this is what I honestly believe. I believe, because I'm not a pastor, I don't have to be scripturally sound, because I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm just, I'm living for myself, and I'm trying to use Christian principles just based on the commandments, like, because that's what a commandment is. It's a law. So I only believe in two laws, basically. That's, love God as you love yourself, and then, love God and yourself, love your neighbors as you love God and yourself. Those are the only two laws I will ever follow ever again. No other laws to me. And no other laws matter to me, because, I just don't believe in any other laws, because all these other laws literally take away your liberty. Mm-hmm. There is nothing that anybody can do that there is no laws that are here. There's no laws that
are you distracted? Is the counselor in the background? Is that why you're distracted?
No, but there's no laws that man can make that already hasn't been addressed by those two commandments. I'm not kidding you. We honestly didn't need the Constitution if we just follow those two laws, but because we don't.
Well, you need something to govern people with. So, like, I think let's look at it from the larger perspective, right? So, how does this relate to impeachment? How does absolute immunity relate?
Okay, so because basically the impeachment, well, because we're gonna jump away, because this is, I don't want to say this is really complicated, but I think in order to understand the impeachment of the president, people need to understand how even the local politicians, even the local street sweepers, have absolute immunity, because they are doing their job under the color of the law, and that's just how it works. So because I wanted to pull it up, because there's a lot of good, and you want to really get into like police brutality and how, because through police brutality you can
well, let's stay on track with one thing, right? Let's focus on the homeless thing, the absolute immunity thing, because I think
no, but this is this actually applies to because people need to understand, like, it's called immunity for Section 5150 decisions. and we're talking about the mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found it's on page 54, so I got to pull it up really
Well,
quick.
you don't have to pull up all the legal jargon because I think we're gonna lose people if we go
Yeah,
through it.
yeah, yeah. No, but people, no, this is in real basic, simple English. Okay, so this is so here's immunity for malicious prosecution. That's a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
As stated above, Government Code Section 821.6 expressly provides immunity for an officer instituting any judicial or administrative proceeding, even if he acts maliciously and without probable cause.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This immunity is an absolute bar to a claim for malicious prosecution or opposed to false arrest against an officer. See, that's if an officer acts maliciously
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't have probable cause, he is still immune for, sending you to jail.
Huh.
Think about that. If a local dude, let's say he's a KKK guy, and he's just pissed off and doesn't want to do anything against it in California, there's nothing you can do about that. You have to just take it. You can't sue this guy. Not in California, because there's Government Code Section 821.6. And that's just not for cops. That's just for any person who works for the government.
Any person at all, huh?
Yeah, but under Government Code Section 821.6, that's what happens. So think about this. If you are a pastor and you're trying to help these homeless people,
Mm-hmm.
and the cops go, hey, look, that's against the law. What are you going to do if you're that pastor? Are you going to prosecute? Like, they're literally prosecuting the religious people. Not anymore, because the church has learned their lesson. I thought it was all a myth, because I've heard in the past, I've heard people say, oh yeah, these pastors get beaten, they get arrested, and with no due process.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought they were, telling stories, but it's actually under Government Code 821.6. Yeah, it's totally legal.
And so
totally legal.
And so when it comes to the Trump administration, right, and them sort of, I guess, pushing back against House Democrats to basically impeach him, how is that a form of this? Like, how come the president doesn't have immunity?
So the president's being impeached because the Congress believes that he doesn't have absolute immunity.
He doesn't. So even though he is somebody who
he does.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. He does. So I still think I haven't been following the whole impeachment thing because I just think the thing is a joke. Even if you won't remove him from office, so therefore I stopped following, right? And even if you do, you get Pence. You don't get somebody that you put in there. So I don't understand the point of this. I just think it's a waste of time. But continue talking, because I'll be honest, I haven't been following it.
Okay, so what's happening in Congress? In a nutshell, President Trump got impeached for obstruction of Congress. No, it's the truth. Like, that's the charge. He wasn't, it's not bribery. It's the abuse of power. That's just some made up stuff. But obstruction of Congress is a real claim. It's a real charge.
Okay.
So the thing is, everybody knows Adam Schiff never. Okay, so this is where I was wrong, and then I was corrected today. I honestly thought that in order for the Congress, okay, so for those who, I don't know if they listen or not to the impeachment hearings, but the impeachment hearings, the reason why it's obstruction of Congress because the Congress served a subpoena to the president, some of his people, and they ignored it, right? And I thought that you had to go to the Supreme Court to go ahead, and get the subpoena. Like the judges have to say, okay, is this a legitimate subpoena? But that's not how it works. So basically how it works is, and I didn't know this until Counselor corrected me, uh, you have the Congress, the House has to vote for the subpoena. So the entire House has to vote on it. And because the House didn't vote on the subpoena is no good.
Okay.
So the president was actually wrong when he said you have to go to the court and get the court to, make it's just like a regular in court. Like if somebody subpoenas me, I'm not going to go unless the judge orders it. So
Right.
Trump and some people like Giuliani, they all thought it too. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense because that's how it's done in the criminal proceedings. But this isn't a criminal matter. So the House has to vote for the subpoena. If everybody, not everybody, but if the majority, I forget the numbers, but I think it's like 3/5. The 3/5 of the House votes yes for the subpoena, then the president must come to the House of Representatives and ask and defend himself or do whatever the House tells him, answer the questions. That's how it works. And but anyway, so because they never took a vote, this whole impeachment thing should have been thrown out. And but anyway, but a lot of these attorneys arguing for Trump are saying, hey, look, the president has absolute immunity. We all do. And because everybody has absolute immunity, you can't sue us. You can't take us to court, which is technically true. But that's the thing. So the president, if you're looking at absolute immunity, everybody is absolutely immune. Everybody. So because everybody has absolute immunity, going through the courts, it's just a waste of time.
Yeah.
So impeachment should focus on procedure. Did Adam Schiff follow procedure? Did he get the votes for the subpoena? And the answer is no. Him and like 5 people said, hey, look, I want a subpoena from that committee. And 5 people cannot ever speak for the entire country. That's why it's an entire body. The entire House has to vote on it. And that's how you make it a legitimate subpoena when it comes to impeachment. So, it took about 30 seconds to explain, but there's nothing to this impeachment. It's just a show.
That's what I'm saying, because what would it be for? And here's another angle you could come at it with, which we've talked about before, which is, doesn't his 4th Amendment rights apply also as the president, which is just cause and due process?
Well, see, but the thing is, that's in theory you would be correct, but it's about absolute immunity. Our people, and this is why this is so stupid that everybody's making an issue. What are the limits on absolute immunity? And so, and to bring it back to the homeless situation of churches, see, churches need to start fighting absolute immunity at the local level. Because this is the only way it's going to be done. Because if you listen to the impeachment hearing, you will hear a lot of case law,
right?
And there is no case law for people fighting against absolute immunity unless it's against the police. And we talked about that before, like
Sure.
Absolute immunity, unless exigent circumstances or whatever. So, but what the churches need to do, they have to start challenging absolute immunity against the local governments that stop them from doing what they want to do.
You're saying that as a result, then it trickles up, right? And then people.
Yeah, it's the only way, because it's because I know like economy works trickle down,
right?
But justice
trickles up.
It always has. Because, when you really look at the history of Jesus wasn't like, boom, this big, mighty king. It was from the bottom and it went up. It's just how, justice is done. It's done from the ground up, like atmosphere.
And so with the average citizen, right, who understands these things, I think churches are a good example. I think picking churches as an example of resisting absolute immunity is a good example, because I mean, as far as we're concerned, we don't have to talk too much about church or the different sects or denominations, but most Americans in this, what I'm saying is most Americans in this country attend some form of church, right? We're not going to talk about doctrine or anything. But they attend some form of church, so they have an idea as to how all this stuff works. You know, they have an idea as to what kind of rights and what kind of sort of privileges that a church may be extended to, but not be completely aware of that. Because until tonight, I didn't know that that was the case. I did not know that you couldn't house homeless people. Like, churches weren't removing homeless people because they didn't want them. It was because it was actually illegal. And I don't know when it became illegal. When was it actually illegal to house people like that? Is it just a standard trespassing law?
Well, now in 2020, every city across America, it's illegal for churches to help people. It's just against the law.
Well, no, you can help people. I mean, I'm sure that you know, you can have ministries.
People, though, because think about this, because I really want people to understand this. When a church helps people, it does great things, like end slavery in the United States. Seriously,
That's you're right.
And that's the thing, because I you know, again, like, because I know a lot of people might think this is crazy, but this is the truth. And people might not want to hear it because they don't want to know the truth. The truth is progressive ideology. I don't care who it is. If you are a progressive person, you will always be a racist who hates God. It's just how it works. Charles Darwin was a guy who hated God. He hated God. He invented a science that has no, like, if anybody looked at Darwin's science today, they're like, what the hell were we thinking? This isn't science. This is a bunch of muckety muck. But good effort, because it was way back in 1800 something. So, you know, because think about this. Our knowledge today, like your average, well, maybe not average high school kid, but if you went to a nice private school, like Elizabeth Warren's son, because, you know, this is funny because Elizabeth Warren, she's all like, no school choice, but her kid went to two of the most exclusive schools, one in Pennsylvania and the other one somewhere like in Oklahoma. I don't know where she's from, but you know what I mean? Come on. So at those types of schools, those kids know more in high school about science, about, you know, just basic architecture than the scholars of 100 years ago. It's just how it works.
Well, that's just how information works. It gets passed down and accumulates. But
so to be fair to Darwin, you know, whatever.
Yeah,
I know back then.
It's not about whether it's scientifically sound. The way, just to touch on this, I don't want to spend too much time on Darwinism, but when you introduce time aspects and unfathomable lengths of time where people can barely comprehend, like a million years, because they always say things like 65 billion, right? But a million years, even for the human mind, is really, really difficult to comprehend. Heck, even 10,000 years is really hard to comprehend in terms of what you think about. Because if we can progress as a people, right, over, say, a couple hundred years, industrial revolution, have a lot of innovation, or perhaps a lot of knowledge, right? I mean, think about it, right? A million years is a ridiculously, seemingly infinite amount of time if you really think about it. But that's how they throw people off, is because they say, well, it takes millions of years for something that is impossible to happen, which is basically one thing transforming into another magically. But I don't want to spend too much time on that. What I'm trying to say is that you're right, is that it is a outward rejection of the efforts that the church does. When I say church, I just mean, you know, as a whole, a bunch of churches in the old days, which back in the old days, you only had Baptists, you only had Baptist churches.
Yeah, that is the truth. It's just how it works.
Right. But that's the thing. In active restriction of helping your neighbor, right? You know, the second greatest commandment, which is to help others, love others, or whatnot, that is a form of, is effectively discouraging people from knowing the truth. You know, the end goal here, I think that no matter how far we stray when it comes to the topics, it's always just going to be about recognizing progressivism as you see it being a complete and utter threat, and the trajectory that our country's headed. And unfortunately, this is the problem with scope of government, right? Is that I don't think that people have a clear handle on it when you've introduced, you know, clauses, right, into the Constitution that allow government to be able to do this, for absolute immunity. And we could talk all day and night about the Civil Rights Act being a complete fraud, because it was never about making sure that people were equal. Because when people think civil rights, here's the one crazy thing, right? In terms of helping people, if you want to call it that, when people think civil rights, they think of equality, and it's not the case. What the civil rights is defining certain people as protected classes, and certain, like, protected classes, absolute immunity, protected classes, where you cannot discriminate based off of certain things. That's why in 2020 you can't say certain things against protected classes of people. It's a form of absolute immunity. Like, if the end goal is absolute immunity where you can't say anything against this person, malicious or otherwise,
Yeah.
giving them civil rights is a precursor to that. Am I making sense? Because you talked about absolute immunity. I'm talking about how eventually, if it's gay people or trans people and they want absolute immunity, it would mean essentially that. It would basically be how you define people of a disadvantaged minority class and what kind of rights you give them. The end goal is that. The end goal is a socialist totalitarian government where nobody can say anything against each other. And I believe that that's my conclusion I've come to since we've talked about
Well,
this.
I believe the end game is to destroy Christianity.
Well, that too. And when you do
Yeah,
that,
but here's why. The reason why progressives need to destroy Christianity is because Christianity is the only. I'm not even talking about religiously or anything like this, because I don't know scripture. And I'm always honest about that. I don't know diddly about scripture, but I do know philosophy. So just the philosophy on the commandments is the only way to ever pull yourself up from the bootstraps. I don't care what it is, whether
yeah.
you have an addiction, whether you have, you're broke, whether you're being oppressed by other people, maybe you're unjustly jailed. The only way to ever get through any situation is through those two commandments. You got to love yourself. You have to do it. If you don't love yourself, you are destroyed. But that's the thing. Progressive ideology teaches differently. Every progressive will tell you your rights come from another source. It doesn't come from, loving God, loving yourself. It comes from, hey, look, this guy's going to help you. This guy's rich. This guy has money. He will help you. You know what I mean? It's, and I'll use Martin Luther King as a good example. Every single person looked to him as the way out of a situation. But what happened? Instead of loving yourself, first loving God, loving yourself, and then loving, God, yourself, and your neighbor, what did they do? Everybody put their love in a man that was in bed with the progressives. And that's what happened to the destruction of our society. Ever since the 60s, we have been going downhill for a reason. And maybe I wasn't that clear on the maybe I wasn't that clear on MLK, but it's not about MLK. But when people start idol worshiping, when people do this, it leads to the destruction of the core principles of one's faith, because that's what we do. Like a good modern example would be, I'm not going to get into it. Actually, I changed my mind about speaking about it, but no, because it might be, it's
Well,
too.
you can't just say it and then not say it. I mean,
Like, hero worship is what we do as our society, and it started with MLK Jr. We hero worship MLK Jr. And okay, so what's another good example of hero worship today that involves, things like absolute immunity? So, frantic schizo man, just, R.I.P. Kobe, right? So that's a form of hero worship. Obviously, maybe that's a prayer or whatever, but the thing is like this. When we do this hero worshiping thing, we put our heroes in front of ourselves. And that's not healthy. Because think about this. When Kobe died, it was a foggy day or whatever, and the government, as much as I hate the government, but they grounded all of their, helicopter flights. Like there was no,
Really?
yeah, no, because it was too foggy. The cops couldn't do so. Whenever it's foggy, that's the day to start. I hate to say things like this, but it's the truth. This is how it is. If you don't know, like, street hustling, you're never gonna do well on the streets. But if you want to rob people and do like a bank robbery or whatever, you do it on a foggy day because you're not gonna have air support. It's just how it works. So because helicopters can't fly because they might run into a tree or a power line because it's too foggy, visibility is very low. And a helicopter is not, you can't maneuver well in a helicopter. You just can't. So if you're going to do some robberies, you do it on a foggy day because, it's just how it works. So, and everybody, not that everybody knows this, but if you're from the streets, you kind of know this. And if you're a pilot, you know this as well. So I know this pilot knew this. And still flew anyway. Why? Because who was on that helicopter? Rick Fox, another famous Laker, Kobe Bryant. Those people used their celebrity, and a guy who, I don't know who this pilot is, but let's pretend he's a Christian. So a person who honestly believes in Jesus would be like, hey, look, I get it. You guys are megastar celebrities, but I love myself. I'm not going to put myself in danger and fly when it's foggy. And, so he didn't follow.
Your theory is something that you read. I mean, I'm not sure about that.
No, this is how, no, seriously, this is the truth. I mean, it's not out yet, but trust me, and I'm not saying, I get information before everybody else, but just, if you know how things work, everybody was grounded that day. And almost any person from LA or even from San Francisco, if you're a street hustler, if you've ever been chased by cops, it's always good to do it on a foggy day. At night, they got the big light, the searchlight, they can get you. But fog, you use that searchlight on a fog, guess what happens? It acts like a mirror, reflects the light, and you are totally blind. So you do it only when it's foggy. I mean, I shouldn't be giving out this information, but if you really had to,
that's a crazy theory. But okay.
No, and it's not a conspiracy theory. Sorry. But if because eventually this will come out, because everybody will know, like the county sheriff, LAPD, Orange County, they all knew it was foggy because it doesn't get foggy that often in LA. So it's a pretty big thing when it's foggy. And airplanes are not the same as helicopters. So you'll see that everything I'm saying. I mean, I don't have documents, but it has to come out. When they go through the black box, they'll say the visibility was really low. It was human error. But that's my point, because we hero worship. We allow progressive ideology to take place, and we allow ourselves to risk our own lives because we hero worship, because we do all of these crazy things that we shouldn't do. And that's the dangers of progressive ideology, because we
yeah, it does. It takes more precedence, and you have to actually consider this too, because it actually has a lot to do with our current president, right? It doesn't. The thing is, if it were a different president, if it were Obama, he would actually be exempt with getting away with murder, which he did, and that's because of progressive ideology. I think that what you bring up is a crucial thing to remark on, because it actually amplifies people's existing prejudice. It actually allows you to supersede certain things and certain laws that you would have because somebody is put in that particular situation. There's a really funny thing of why of why. Oh, look, there's a comment that says, "I'm a pilot, and I'd have to agree. I don't think they should have been flying." Wow, you called it. See, I didn't even consider the weather. That's something that I clearly didn't think about when this was all going down. But I get it. You know, you have a forensic mind, so you're just like, they had no right to be flying on a foggy day.
Well, I don't know the ins and outs. I'm only speaking
Yeah,
about.
I don't know either. I just think it's really sad because, you know, there's no instance in which like the pilot was intoxicated or anything. Like I can understand, you know, what.
No. Well, it's no. I'm not saying anything negative about the pilot. I'm pretty sure the pilot was a good pilot. He knew what to do, but you know, because he was, you know, hero worshiping, he put himself at risk. It's just, you know, and that's the thing. It's like, because, you know, like I don't want, you know, people think, oh, I'm not a know-it-all. I'm just common sense. This is just basic common sense, and I'm hoping that you know, that's not the case. But you know, in reality, just knowing how, because I was an atheist and everything else, I know this is about hero worshiping, and this guy wasn't following the commandments. It's that simple. And but I'm telling you now, those commandments apply to every single aspect of your life. Seriously, if this guy would have just thought differently, hey, look, it's foggy, and you know, I love myself. I can't do, but you know, he did it. And what happened? Not only did he not love himself, but he didn't love his neighbors. He killed 8 other people. Or you know,
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too harsh on the pilot because he died too. But that's
yeah,
the
that's
thing.
my point. But do
No,
you see how
I
it could be applied to everything? Christianity could literally be applied to every aspect of your life. Before you do anything, you should ask yourself, is this loving myself? Is this loving my neighbors? And seriously, every single thing should be looked at that lens. Again, I'm not scripturally sound. I don't know anything, but just from those basic things, like, you know, a guy like me can just reflect and look at every single thing. Like, that's why, like, Christianity blows my mind, because when I look back at all of my years, I'm thinking, holy crap. Like, you know, like I love the counselor. I'm happy, you know, with everything. But when I think about, if I just apply those 2 little principles, those 2 commandments to my life, I'm thinking, my goodness, like, you know what I mean? Like my life would be so different. But you know what I mean? But you can't go backwards and da 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 da. But if people honestly apply those 2 little things, everything takes care of itself. And but here's how we tie it into absolute immunity. Because progressives have always known the only threat to humanity, or not humanity, the only threat to their power is Christianity. Because look at what the Africans do, look at what the former slaves did. Look at what they did. They went from nothing, you know, slaves, to being the most affluent people on the planet Earth. Literally the planet Earth.
During the Reconstruction. But yeah.
Yeah, no,
And
but guess what? As soon as they turned to progressive ideology, they went back to being slaves, basically, because that's what welfare is. Welfare is nothing but slavery, but suicidal slavery, when you enslave yourself. And that's what's happening in Black communities now. But that's the power of progressive ideology. They successfully take away and strip away Christianity at its core. And nobody seems to recognize that. So, and this is why, like, it's not in the scripture. It's just not, I mean, I don't know the scripture, but that's why our biggest threat is progressive ideology. So these guys aren't dumb. They made the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is the biggest Jim Crow law ever. You know, but think about it. Why don't we have school choice? We don't have school choice because why? It's in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It clearly defines how we're not going to have it. And
you know, I do want to touch on that aspect because it relates to what we're talking about here. But I really quickly want to address something in the chat as well, which was by refilling the cup. Baptist churches are Protestant. The Protestants didn't come about until they broke away from Catholicism. Catholicism has been around longer than the Baptist churches. I'm just going to very politely say that that's not true. Baptist churches did not come from Protestantism. Protestantism is a lot of those other denominations that you might have heard, other walks of faith like Calvinism, Anglicanism, or Methodist, all of that stuff, which did break from Catholicism. But Baptist churches, in terms of, I don't even like the term Baptist. I just like to think Bible believing has been around before Catholicism. What Catholicism is, I just need to answer that. It was Christianity that was instituted into law. And instead of bowing down and worshiping God, they basically replaced with things, and they have idolatry and whatnot. And that's how you had Catholicism in a nutshell. But Catholics were persecuted, people believing Christians. When we think of the Dark Ages and people being burned at the stake, those were Christians that were believing in the Bible. And, you know, I mean, for a good amount of time, you weren't allowed to actually read the Bible. So Baptists, in terms of those types of Christians, right, the ones that have always been persecuted, have been around. I mean, we come from the apostles, right? I mean, essentially after Jesus ascended into heaven, that's all the people that were spreading the gospel around, those were Bible-believing Christians. So I just wanted to address that. No, the Christianity that we know, I mean, there are a lot of Protestant religions that came out of Catholicism, but I'm not a Protestant. And I think that most Bible-believing Christians aren't either, which unfortunately because Catholicism is huge. Now, one thing I just wanted to touch on that real quick, but let's really quickly talk about that Jim Crow law because it does relate to this. I believe that the end goal is to essentially basically grant yourself, you know, freedom only for select people, because that's really what the Civil Rights Act was about. You mentioned something about school districts, right? About how you can't send your school to a better, or you can't send your child to a better school because of that 1964 Civil Rights Act. And busing, I believe, is also another part of that, but we'll talk about that in a second here. But do you know the reason for that? Because if not, I kind of have a theory here that I'd like to share.
I'm going to pull it up right now because it's basically Title 4, Section 201 or something.
I believe that the reason for that is because during the 60s, right, what did you have that was very, very prevalent, right? You had segregation laws. Now, here's the thing. This is where they get you. And this is going to be a progressive ideology lesson for everybody who's listening. And I hope you're paying attention too. But one thing. So here's the deal. Before the 1964 Civil Rights Act, what did you have in America in the 50s and 60s? You had segregation, right? You had like blatant segregation, which was like colored people. That's what they were called. I'm not being racist, but they were called colored people. You go through, you know, this door, you sit here. We even have to segregate the water fountains, right? That was the thing. You want to know the illusion that was created by the 64 Civil Rights Act? Because people talk about it as being, hey, the end of the goal here is to basically desegregate, right? The end of segregation, because we now have the 64 Civil Rights Act. You're muted, by the way. In case
I'm muted on purpose, but
okay. So here's my point. Here's my point with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. People think that it was the end of segregation as we know it, right? No more separated, you know, all kinds of stuff like bathrooms, busing, that type of thing. However, if you're talking about the school system, which meant that you could only schools in your district, because of segregation that happened in the past, it put certain minorities of people in poorer neighborhoods. Therefore, segregation takes care of itself. Because if you can only go to predominantly black schools or, you know, poorer schools, and certain people can only go to certain schools that were more affluent because they lived in those neighborhoods because of zoning, because of districts, then you have segregation in the future regardless. Do you see how I got there? I mean, does that make sense?
No, but see, but that's exactly right. but here's oh God,
I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard anybody, because I love studying the 1964 Civil Rights Act because it is a Jim Crow law. It's just that most people don't know it. But I've never heard that conclusion. It was supposed to create segregation in the next 20 to 30 years, which is why you had Los Angeles race riots, which is why you had people who would pit against each other with different income levels in different neighborhoods. It created segregation implicitly.
Well, the thing is, okay, so
I mean, I could be wrong, but that's my
no, you're right. 64. No, you're right. But see, the problem too that people don't see is it was also to stop the Chinese. It wasn't just to stop blacks. It was also to stop the Chinese, because you got to remember, in the 1800s, blacks were the Chinese of 2020.
They were affluent.
Yeah, but in education as well. So they were the most educated. They were the most, they had the most money, just like in 2020. But guess what's happening now? In 2020, it's extremely hard for Asians to do well. Why? Because of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It applies to them too, but it applies to them at the top. The 64 Civil Rights Act will effectively take care of any minority on top while taking care of making sure the people on the bottom stay at the bottom. Because if you need, like the perfect example would be SAT scores. If you need a 1600, like literally, if you're an Asian, you have to get at least a 1600 perfect score to get into Harvard and Yale or Princeton or anything like that. Because you need like 100 to 200 points more than the white guy to get in if you're Asian. Right. But that's because of the 64 Civil Rights Act. It has a dual purpose and dual outcomes.
You're right. I feel like we never talked about that, but it only made sense because when you described it a few minutes ago as a Jim Crow law, it clicked. It clicked because it has to be like that.
Well, I'm not.
You have to.
So I don't talk about that.
What I'm saying is, they had a lot of people fooled by saying that this Civil Rights Act would desegregate public areas, but the long-term goal was to create economic inequality and disadvantages with people in the long run implicitly. So people are like, oh, black people and white people can mingle together. No. That's not the case here. They have zoning now, which means you only go to a black school. You only go to a white school. And when you guys grow up, one person is going to serve the other.
No,
one person.
How messed up.
That's why we have that. Minimum wage laws is also another thing we got to talk about on the show, because I could go all day about that. It's just there's so much fraudulent, anti-capitalistic sentiments that are actually working in against minority groups. People think minimum wage laws are good, but they're not. Like
God, because this reminds me of a recent post from Candace Owens.
Yeah. A rip on Candace.
Yeah, no. What you said just reminded me of, and I'm thinking, man, she is one. I will never understand it. I just won't. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. Going back to because the reason why we never really talked about Asians too much is because Asians are at the top in our society. 2020, specifically Chinese Americans and Korean Americans, they are the number one demographic when it comes to education. The highest paying jobs and lawyers, doctors, whatever. It's mostly those Asian Americans. So that's why we don't harp on it too much. But at the same time, because there's so many Asians that live in what used to be the black ghettos, they too are also affected. So the rich people, like their rich parents or whoever, who are, because at some point you got to get cut off from your parents. And then if you have I don't want to say a mixed race baby or whatever, but for whatever reasons why Asians end up in the ghetto, like the ghetto in San Francisco, it's nothing but Chinese. Like Chinatown is no longer Chinatown. There's like the second Chinatown and then the third Chinatown. Like there's 3 Chinatowns in San Francisco.
Right.
But the Chinese living in the ghetto areas, come on, they too now have to go to these crappy schools. But again, like I said, because as a whole, they are generally the top. That's why we really don't go into much like how it, like, you know, the 61st Civil Rights Act also stops the Asian minorities at the top as well as the bottom. It has a dual purpose because think about it. Forget about Andrew Yang, but if there is ever an Asian that honestly was successful, you know, not like Ed Lee, but an honest to God Asian who, you know, used the principles of Jesus and became successful, what would happen to the people coming out of Harvard, coming out of Princeton, coming out of Yale? They would lose their influence. They would lose their power. They would lose so much.
Right.
Because, you know, why is big tech so left leaning? Because big tech like Google and Facebook only hire from those institutions.
Progressive institutions.
Yeah, only exclusively. If you are going to be a big wig and that's why they are in a lot of people don't like a lot of these Bernie supporters. They have no clue because they're uneducated. You know,
we've got a few Bernie supporters watching right now, but that's okay.
No, but
I mean,
look, the Bernie supporters who are listening to us right now, I highly doubt that they went to Harvard or Princeton or Yale, because hardly any. And think about it. How many Bernie supporters honestly went to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale? Very few. Oh, yeah, I know. The counselor just said something, but talking about that. But it's the truth. Bernie supporters do not have the education to understand where progressive ideology comes from. You know,
I also
what about you? Like, what?
I also want to add on to that because he's also defined, you know, by most people collectively and that are political, you know, the furthest left advocate, the furthest left candidate. But here's another thing I will also say. Bernie comes from a long line of progressive influencers, you know, basically, you know, educated by the same people that taught Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, Saul Alinsky, right? Which is basically the guy who advocated for the haves and the have-nots. For people who aren't educated and are strung up on marijuana all day, because I feel like it's always stoners that are supporting Bernie for a good reason, because they can't think straight. Now, if you're a stoner and you're brainwashed, when you hear some old crazy guy saying we're going to forgive all student loan debt and we're going to give Medicare for all and everything, that sounds pretty good, right? And there's no real cohesive thinking that goes into the process of considering, well, how does this work? Right? Where does this all come from? Does the government even just have, you know, its own power to absolve us all from our debts? But here's the tricky part. I'm willing to bet, and this is what socialists do, is that they create inclusive programs, right, that don't seem expensive at first, aka Green New Deal, you know, Medicare for all, whatnot, or maybe this federal student loan forgiveness program, which by law, you can't even get out of it with bankruptcy. But that's another thing. They do that in an effort to keep you in bondage forever. Like, we're not just talking you, but your children, whatnot. That's the goal. The goal is this. What was that example? Like, I don't know if I could be butchering the story. I'm paraphrasing here. But I think Joseph Stalin was interviewed like back in like the 30s and 40s. And, you know, about like how you keep people in bondage and keep them in line, right? And his metaphor was essentially taking everything that they have away from them, like you would a dog, starving a dog, essentially taking all its resources away and then feeding it. You see what I mean? So it's just kind of like it's like they don't know that they have to depend on you to survive. They just know to listen to you, and that's what Bernie does. Because it sounds great, but it keeps you in bondage forever. And all these stoners and all these hippie Bernie supporters that are, you know, Santa Cruz, if you go to Santa Cruz down in the Bay Area, everybody there is a Bernie supporter because everybody there smokes pot. Yeah. So they can't think for but that's a different, but you get what I'm saying. Right? Like, I want
to understand that. Absolutely right. But here's the thing, because I want to address Viciously for a bit, because he's fun. He's actually making me laugh with a lot of his things.
Yeah, you get trolls once in a while. It's a live chat.
No, because he's making valid points. Because I used to think like him. I really did. And the thing is, because now, again, if you understand what I'm trying to say, I'm not attacking progressives. I'm literally telling you what it is as a fact. It's not an attack because I'm not judging these people. What progressives do, it is a fact of what they want. They want absolute power, which is why, like the hero worshiping thing, when we look back at the accident of, and it's tragic. It's a tragic accident, what happened to Kobe. But if you look at the root cause of it, what was it? It was progressive ideology. He brought up the Titanic. Oh, if there was Christians, look, if you would have loved yourself, because if you know anything about the history of the Titanic, it was identical, parallel to what had happened to Kobe. The people were rushing it. They were not ready. They knew not to, like, they knew that ship was not structurally sound. They knew it. And they did it anyway because, like, what are the odds? I've flown in fog before. I could probably do it again. And the bottom line is, no, you shouldn't have done it. But because they don't understand the concept, and this is the thing, who was the person who actually invented that concept of loving God and loving yourself that way? It was Jesus. He was the only one. It's not in the Old Testament. There is no like, oh, love yourself, love yourself.
There is, but there's a lot more to it, and so I'm gonna correct you on that. There's more to it, but the surface level principle is correct here. I believe that.
Well, as far as commandments go, no, like in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt love yourself is not part of it. It's not. In the Old Testament, it doesn't say thou shalt love yourself. That I believe. I mean, because I get what you're saying. I agree with you on that part. Like in the Old Testament, there's a lot of stories about loving yourself and blah, 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 blah. But there is no specific law that says love yourself. There isn't. That's unique to Christianity. And that's the one thing that always blows me away. And it's like, man, every single person after Jesus has tried to reinvent that will, whether it's Tony Robbins, other Christians, the guys who Ayn Rand. No, I loved Ayn Rand. She was an atheist, and I loved her. I thought she was, like, she was such the perfect human being.
And Ayn Rand is seen as the figurehead of libertarianism, right? But all Ayn Rand and libertarianism is basically conservatism without Christian principles. That's what libertarianism is.
But it goes back to Bernie supporters feeling good. That's all they want. They just want to feel good, not knowing. And the Old Testament's really good at at those stories about how feeling good is not good for you. You know what I mean? Because there's more to life than just feeling good. No, because most things that make you feel good are actually very bad for you, like smoking weed. Right now, one of the biggest problems we have are people smoking marijuana.
Yeah, it's a problem.
It's medicine.
Or legalize, but now I know it's a tool used by the progressives to make everybody stupid.
Well, I mean, look, I'm still for making it legal because I just, there should just the use of jails, and it's ridiculous. But
okay,
we have to know that, hey, look, smoking weed is not good. Not only does it destroy your brain, destroys the cholesterol in your brain, but the smoke itself contains 20 times more ammonia than a tobacco cigarette. How is that healthy? Like, people mind like, I hate secondhand smoke from cigarettes because when I was working the clubs and stuff like that, my nose would just fill with black stuff. Now imagine cigarette smoke 20 times stronger than that. That's weed smoke. Come on. And people don't really understand. Like, I mean, because, the thing is, a lot of people don't understand science. They don't do experiments.
That's the thing. The propaganda, not necessarily recent, but I remember like 10 years ago, because I think that like marijuana legalization and advocacy hit like a breaking point in the mid 2000s to the late 2000s. So like 2005 to 2012 was a time where it's like it wasn't legal, but everybody was trying to advocate for it. And there were a lot of studies out there to advocate it as being a replacement or a substitute to smoking cigarettes, right? Now you could do it, but also at the same time, it wasn't as bad as drinking. That was the justification for it. It's like, okay, well, at least don't drink. If anything, you're going to smoke weed, and you can drive essentially while you're doing that. And that was, I believe, part of it. I think part of the advocacies for making sure that it was legal, readily available, was to make people just more docile. Like, I'm not going to use the word dumb or whatnot, but just more docile. Like, it's, I don't know how
the Mandarins did that.
What?
The Mandarins also did that. When they took over China, they didn't do it with war. They did it with the opioid crisis. That's what they did. They got everybody high. They brought in the heroin. They brought in, different opioids that was found in that region. And everybody was high, and the Mandarins were highly educated. They were highly educated people, blah, 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 blah. And that's how they took over China. I mean, think about it. What's the, Mandarin is the dominant language in China. Why? Because the Mandarin effect is still felt today in China and how did those people do it? They weren't warriors people. They weren't doing any of that stuff. How did they do it? That's basically how they're doing it today in America. How do we get people so docile? How do we get them to willingly give up their rights? Think about that. And that's what progressive ideology does. Progressive ideology makes people willfully think differently, because if you can't love yourself, what threat really are you? Because remember, we spoke about that, before. What is codependent personality disorder? It's when you take care of the entire world, but you don't know how to take care of yourself. So basically, you're injuring all the people that you think you're really helping because you're not offering real help. It's just, I don't want to say it's BS, but because the intent is good. But that's where that term, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, comes from. It comes from those people who mean to do well, but if they don't love themselves, how are they going to ever take care of anybody else? But how many people actually suffer from that? Police officers, many nurses, most attorneys, because, think about it. If you're in the because I don't know how many of the listeners really depend on a public defender. But if you got one, you're going to be screwed, because those guys really don't care about, they're just living. They're just taking a space. They're filled with self-hate. Like, why do I got this job? Oh, another junkie. Oh, another this. Oh, another that. And these guys have totally given up. But where did they learn to give up? And it goes back to the beginning of this podcast. The churches gave up. When the church gives up, it teaches everybody else to give up. Because like you said earlier at the beginning, the church's job is to give out the gospel. But what do they do instead? They've given up. And when they give up, people lose hope. People become like that guy, Vicious E. That's what they become. Because the churches or the leaders of the churches have failed, they literally make people like myself or Vicious E into atheists, into, just people who have given up on life and given up on society, given up on helping people. Because I honestly believe we can pull ourselves out of this mess. I really do. When people start remembering the laws that Jesus gave us, we can do anything. Not because, and I like Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins is a good motivational speaker. I've heard him, on clips, and I've seen him on, in movies and whatnot. So I know he's a positive dude. I have no idea if it's because he's a Christian or if he's applying, Christian, principles or anything like that. But we need more people who, the Christian leaders to honestly start taking on the local government, because that's how the black people did it way back.
And this another thing you haven't mentioned, but you actually brought this up a long time ago when we first started the show, which is sovereignty. Sovereignty is not just about understanding that, but it's also about recognizing your rights. And hey, everybody, good to see you, everyone here. About recognizing your rights and knowing, oops, I'm just hitting some random comments here. Recognizing your rights and also essentially doing something about it, right? Because I think that it goes back to constitutional ideas essentially becoming eroded as a whole. People don't know their rights. People haven't sat down and like actually figured out the fact that you can actually fight for your life. You can actually say no, and you don't have to surrender certain things to the government just because they demand it. Like, a good example of this, and I'll say it again on the show because there's probably a lot of new people who are listening here, but Alex Jones is a great example of American sovereignty. Now, he's an exaggerated version of that, but there was a video clip of him going into the DMV and them asking for his fingerprints or blood samples or whatever. And he immediately freaked out, went full on conspiracy, and was like, I'm not giving you my blood. I'm not giving you this. You guys are trying to lock me down. And there's some truth to that because they're the DMV. As far as I'm concerned, driver's license, what do you need? Identification, birth certificate, whatnot. The heck do you need somebody's fingerprints for or blood?
Well,
you see what I mean? And
well, I know exactly what you mean. I'll take it further. Why do you even need a driver's license? See, no, seriously, like you don't need a driver's license to get insurance. You might pay more for insurance, but you don't need a driver's license to get insurance. Why in the world do we
operate a motorized vehicle? You need it to operate a motorized vehicle, and I think some libertarians probably view that as a cons, like the mandate for insurance. But that's what I'm saying. That example I was using was people not being aware that they don't require these things. So don't just volunteer your DNA and your information just because they ask of it. Now, if a cop stops you, because we did talk about absolute immunity as it pertains to cops, it doesn't mean that you have to be combative, right? Because here's the thing: being combative is not actually loving your neighbor. So you shouldn't be combative, but you can disarm the situation by knowing what your rights are. Like if a cop stops you, right, for a broken rear light, then he has no right to search their trunk unless you give him a reason to search your trunk. But see, here's the thing: people shoot themselves in the foot because they don't know any better, right? They go, "Oh, okay, because he asked to see what was in my trunk, now he's got to search my trunk because I gave him an opening. I gave him a reason to do so. Why? Because I surrendered my rights to him." And you want to talk about fighting absolute immunity? People just need to learn their rights, but they got to learn their rights and exercise them without being combative. The problem with a lot of black people, I'm just going to be honest here, is when you're stopped by the cops and you're black, you get all combative. You get all crazy. You think that they're just out. You're giving them ammunition when you do that. But if you're a black guy, you know your rights and you're like polite or whatnot, you could probably disarm that cop, honestly. I'm serious, and people know these things.
You're exactly right. No. Because I actually wrote something about that. It's on my Minds account. But no. But you are exactly right. If you can sit down and break it down to an officer, like what they're doing, like you have to really explain. Hey, look, because to be a cop, it's a very, very dangerous job. It's the type of job that, even though they have absolute immunity, but because it's because of that absolute immunity and how they do their job and they're trained to hate people, being a police officer is an honest to God job that's worse than being a soldier somewhere in Afghanistan or something else, because every single day these cops willingly put their lives on the line trying to stop, like make-believe type of crimes and all this other stuff. Obviously, it's against the Constitution. But seriously, what kind of a job is it that says this? Everybody's your enemy. Every single person you encounter can end your life that day. That's the job that police officers have. And that's why I really like when you get pulled over by a police officer, I will always talk to them. I don't, it might sound like I'm lecturing a cop, but I talk to them because I really do fear for their lives. And I say, hey, look, like whenever I get stopped by a cop, I say, hey, look, why are you stopping me? Just tell me outright, why are you stopping me? And as soon as you can, just do your thing, give me my ticket or whatever. But when he's doing his thing, looking me up or whatever, I'll honestly talk to him and say, hey, look, I'll break down exigent circumstances and how, I'll talk to him about, about his oath to the Constitution. It's like, hey, did you guys even study this? But not in that way. I'll say like, hey, did you, I said, have you ever, taken constitutional courses? And I know a couple of websites that give you like free training. And then I'll tell them, hey, look, have you ever considered becoming a trainer yourself? Or, instead of just being a, foot patrol officer or whatever, or if they're doing something good, I'll say, hey, look, you did a good job using your mega speaker or your megaphone or whatever those speakers are called, so get it on the mic, hey, because, safety first, da, 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 da. And if you start talking to them and explaining things to them like, hey, look, because every cop that I've ever encountered always wants to search my car and always want to, pat me down or something like that. I always tell them no. I say, hey, look, just give me my ticket, blah, 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 blah. And then, you can explain to them, hey, look, I would like to know what evidence you're looking for. Because, as of right now, you're trying to tell me some sort of exigent circumstances are in play where you can violate my constitutional rights because you believe you're investigating something. So go ahead and explain to me what you're investigating, and I will tell you, or I could even help you out, da 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 da, and all this other stuff. So, so then, like, you can get into PTSD, all kinds of stuff. So, like, there's no script to follow, but if you really understand, like, it's easier for me now being a Christian versus not being a Christian to talk to cops, because, it's how many of these cops honestly love themselves, and we spoke about this before, how cops commit suicide more than any other way of dying combined. And that's a real scary thought, that our police officers are walking time bombs who are more likely to commit suicide than to get shot by some thug, because I saw somebody from Crenshaw from the 60s. Think about that. The day that South Central's, they don't call it South Central, whatever they call, Compton and wherever, I don't know what they call it now, maybe South LA. But whenever South LA is less likely to kill a cop than a cop committing suicide, something's wrong in our society. Because in theory, cops are, they have good hearts. They're literally doing a job because most cops honestly want to do good. But it goes back to what we're saying, because they don't understand how to love yourself, they can never help people successfully. They just can't. It's really, I don't want to say disheartening, but I honestly believe we can change. I believe our society can change. But it goes back to understanding how to fight absolute immunity. Because the thing is, I know we went into all these different tangents, but if the local churches can start fighting absolute immunity at the local level, to start helping homeless people, to start being able to feed people without a quote unquote soup kitchen. Because think about this.
Well, before you go on, let me just read the super chat real quick. Because inclusion, thank you for your donation. He wrote that the Constitution allowed state established religions in the beginning of the country. Libertarians, liberals pervert the true intent. Yep. Thank you for your comment. Thank you for supporting the show. Okay, go ahead. Now we're
well, no, actually, I wanted to go into more to what that guy just said. But yeah, no, that was no, but see, but that's the thing.
Go ahead. Sorry, that was my
no. But see, but that's the thing. The Constitution also says that no state can hinder the rights, and the local government should not hinder any individuals from practicing their faith, their religion, da 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 da. So how does one combat that? Through absolute immunity. But the only way to go ahead and fight absolute immunity is for these people, whether it's the church, and this is what I would do under Section 1983. That's how we. Well, it's a federal code under federal statute, like Section Code 1863. Counselor, is that right? Nah, she can't hear me. But because I'm having a brain fart right now. But I think it's Section 1983. Section 1983, because I'm thinking dates. So under Section 1983, the same way we go after government entities like the police or whoever, that's how the local pastors have to start attacking these local governments that will not allow them to give out food. Because think about this. When a church feeds the homeless, right? Or just the poor, forget about the homeless, just the poor in general. Why can't a church just make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, put it in a paper bag with an apple and some milk, and start giving it to the kids? Why can't they do that? Why are we so anti-church that we can't trust people to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with an apple and a carton of milk at your local church? Why are we so opposed against that? But we are totally okay with the school to have a summer program that gives out bag lunches that some big corporation made at your local school. Why can't, for the poor kids? Because that's what happens in ghetto areas. They have, they got, the school lunch program all year round because, like Michelle Obama said, hey, look, when these kids are not in school, guess what happens? They're hungry. And it's true. So why do they got to depend on the government? Why is that the government's job? It's not the government's job to feed the people. It's not. But if the government doesn't feed the people, the churches won't do it, not because they don't believe in God or Jesus. They don't do it because why? It's against the law. Churches can't feed the poor. They can't house the homeless. They can't. Why? Because they have absolute immunity to stop churches and individuals from
helping people
from practicing their religion.
And
there's how many like, I know a lot I want to say, but like the Mormons, they have a very peculiar way of belief, and they go here, they go there, and what they do is called trespassing, and they can be arrested for what they do, and many of them have been arrested for what they do, and they don't fight back. Nobody fights back because why? Because you can't fight the law. It's like that song, I fought the law and the law won. Because why? The law has given itself absolute immunity, and people have to start recognizing how to fight it. So how to fight it? You have to start understanding how to use Section Code 1983. And usually it's used for police brutality and other things like that, but it actually applies because, like the law that we spoke about, I already put it down, but the California Section Code that gave absolute immunity for malicious prosecution, even if it's done maliciously, you know, how do you stop something like that? Well, you got to make a federal claim. So if you can show how it took away or violated your rights, and most lawyers are, I don't want to say they are lazy, but they always say, oh, 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. That'll never work. You have to always show how you lost your liberty. And part of religion is part of your liberty, because see, a lot of people when they go and read the first, like, because I get it, inclusion is saying things like, separation of church and state is to protect the church, not the state. I get all that, but that's not what the First Amendment is really for, the individual protections, if that makes any sense. It's because the state itself, like, I'll say San Francisco. San Francisco's job is to protect themselves. So how does San Francisco go ahead and protect themselves? You know what I mean? How do they do it? Well, because they have given themselves absolute immunity at the local level. Why? Because they can't be sued, they can't do this and that, so they can go ahead and start attacking churches. So how is that a constitutional violation if they have absolute immunity? Well, the thing is, the Constitution, the First Amendment says no state-sponsored religions and all this other stuff, blah, 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 blah. But that's not because I'm not probably saying this correctly, but when a pastor goes to court to try to stop the laws that say, hey, look, you cannot house the homeless, or you got to follow all of these rules and all this other stuff, how the pastor should attack it would be, look, I am a protected class. Why? Because is being a Baptist in a big city like San Francisco, I'm going to use San Francisco as an example, because I think it's better to tell, like, instead of trying to break things down with legal jargon or whatever, or theory, I think it's better to go with examples of like real life situations. So if you are a Baptist pastor in San Francisco, and all of these laws are preventing you from doing, helping your neighbors or whatever, giving out food, giving out this or that, because a lot of people say, hey, why is it when the church needs money, they ask me, but when it's time for me to, when a church needs money, they ask me for help, but when I need help, they tell me to pray to God. That's always a big thing. It's like, well, no, that's not true. That whole statement is false, because a church will help you, but the thing is, it's against the law to help you. So how does a pastor fight that? Because they have to recognize that the First Amendment is more than just what, because I get what inclusion is saying. I like what he's saying, but it's more than that. You have to know that there is an individual loss of liberty when you are not allowed, and like physical liberty. So how do you lose physical liberty when you cannot practice your religion? And that's the only way to fight absolute immunity. You have to show how your religion is the foundation of your physical liberty. And I think the sad death of that the incident with Kobe Bryant is a good example how it led to a loss of physical liberty. Your physical, like, he lost his life, obviously. Everybody lost their life. Why? Because, if they were able to practice their religion without restrictions, these guys would be alive today, without a doubt. But because the governments have put so much restrictions on the churches, nobody is even allowed to have the true gospel that, because, and I hate to rag on religions or Bibles or anything like that, but we all know everybody's using the NIV Bible. Everybody. But it's sad, but, it's just, I don't know, but that's my point. So how come we're not allowed access to honest to God religious texts? Well, because they put restrictions on it. They put restrictions on publishers. They put restrictions on almost everything when you're doing business. And the only way to fight it is through, we, as you know, I don't want to say we, but religious leaders have to start fighting this in the courts, start getting precedents when they start to win, because the Supreme Court will side on will side for us. Just that's always been the history of the judges. The judges have always sided, minus 1913 to now. But prior to that, the judges have always ruled on the side of the Christian people. When they were
Right.
in 1890, there was a case decision heard by I think his name was Harning, but anyway, but the first monopoly case tried for the Clayton Act, um, that was cited on the Christians because, to no fault of their own, were they put in that circumstances, and that's where the term, what's that term? There's a term when they call it acts of God. So basically, when they say no fault of your own, that's an act of God.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's unexplainable, why? Because American slavery wasn't just black people. There was a lot of white people who were slaves.
Which a lot of people will actively deny, and I say that a lot.
But remember, but that's why we have to really study the history of slavery, because even that song "Amazing Grace" was written by a white slave. The song "Amazing Grace," I forget who wrote that song, but that guy was a white slave. The lady responsible for the slavery of all the Americas, not just the United States, but North America, South America. That lady was some kind of princess of some kind of like some Wahubu African tribe. I can't pronounce it properly, but she enslaved that man who wrote Amazing Grace. But because he was also because when most people tell the story of the guy from the Amazing Grace, they always say, "Oh, he was a slave ship captain."
Yeah, I've heard of that too. Like,
He was, but because he was a captain in a low-level captain in the naval fleet, but somehow, some way, he was captured. He owed money, so the princess made him a slave for like a good 10 years, and she goes, "You know what? I need you to be my captain of to ship my slaves, more slaves, and sell them to the United States." And that's what he did. That's how he got his freedom, is from him being a slave. So that white slave wrote that song, and it goes back to my point. Christianity is what saved everybody, because why? I don't know how, but I guess the same thing with me, like how it just hit me, when you showed me that stuff from Romans, it just, it's like everything clicked. And at some point it clicked for that guy. And whenever Christianity clicks with people, they're able to do great things. And that's what happened. And the courts have always ruled on our side. And I believe if these pastors start to really start understanding how to apply, the Christian laws in today's society, it will not, I'll say move mountains, but probably could. You know what I mean?
They gotta exercise those rights. Like, it just goes back to that. They gotta fight. They gotta be.
These rights are not in the Constitution, though. That's the point. Like, how to fight against people with absolute immunity, it's not part of the Constitution. It's just not there. It doesn't tell you how to fight it. We can talk until we're blue, but it won't change a judge's mind. So how does one go and fight the system? Because we have to tie in our physical liberty. Because and that's why, for blacks, it's easy. Because we'll say, hey, look, back in the slavery days, this and that, blah, 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 blah. And, through Christianity, we're able to do this, we're able to do that, and da, 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 da. And that's what that judge basically said. No fault of their own. Act of God. That they were slaves and all this other stuff, blah, 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 blah. And in theory, it could have been an act of God that people were put into slavery, because, I don't know. I mean, it just, who knows? Because he put all these rules down and they never follow the rules, and that's the circumstances of of the people. I don't want to say it was a form of punishment, but who knows? But either way, but but that's how you fight it. You fight it by making the links between physical liberty and your faith. Right. And you have to show how your faith is actually something that you need for day-to-day operations. And it's actually quite easy because so many different philosophies are used now in so many different courts and decisions. They'll make decisions like, like anything dealing with DUIs or something dealing with crimes of passion. Okay, so here's another good example: how they apply the law to women. Because recently, some woman was found guilty. She was given 6 months for giving her retarded students Xanax and having sex with them, 16 and 17 years old. And she's like a really ugly chick. And I mean, not that.
Okay, but go on, finish yeah.
But it's important to know, because can you imagine being so young, having sex with somebody really gross and ugly? You know what I mean? That's going to scar a person forever. And that chick only got 6 months. But because that judge goes, well, this, that, and applied philosophies, not Christian philosophy, but philosophies of like feminism, philosophies of rape culture and things like that, from a progressive feminist point of view, that lady only got 6 months for house arrest. But a man who did the exact same thing, he'll get 15 to 20 years in prison.
And that's another men's rights thing that we gotta,
but
at some point.
But the thing is like this: if a judge could apply philosophies of feminist progressive ideology for loss of liberty, they can do the same with Christianity as they have done before. Because when you start studying history from the court's perspective, you will see when judges, you knew who were Christian and you knew who was not. Because like I like to talk about weddings, because why is it illegal why is the legal age 18 years old? It used to be a federal thing. But the states were able to, because it's still a state law, it's up to the states. But the court said there is an obligation to protect the people from predators who might have STD. Like, seriously, it was one of the court's decision. They literally said to protect a young person from an STD, because you don't want to force somebody with syphilis to marry somebody, who doesn't have it, but just because, and that's why they put regulations on it, because they were actually using real principles of loving yourself and blah 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 blah, and trying to tie in Christian philosophy with loss of liberty. And so, are you going to lose your liberty? Yeah, if your type of syphilis attacks your brain, of course you're going to lose physical liberty. Not having your mental faculties is a serious thing. But again, we don't have those types of standards anymore. We just don't. I mean, the Supreme Court still does, but it's extremely hard and expensive to even be heard at the Supreme Court level. So the only way to combat this is through the local churches. They have to start fighting through the court system to try to get their rights back, to start spreading the gospel, because you can't spread the gospel if everybody believes that you're just a bunch of hypocrites. And even I'm guilty of that. I used to always talk crazy about Joel Osteen because he has so much money, but he doesn't house the homeless or anything like that. He doesn't. He just has a big giant stadium. But I didn't know it was against the law. So what do these guys do? They just preach about making all this money. It's true. If you believe in Jesus, you are going to do well in life. Maybe not become a billionaire, but you will never be poor. If you honestly just apply those two
Well, yeah,
principles, you're always going to have something. You'll never be homeless. You'll never, but again, we are regulated not to build our own homes. We are regulated to, not have our own water, and because
right.
people say things like, oh no, because we're going to contaminate our waters. I was like, no, look, where does our sewage go? Does anyone ever think, where does our, toilet water go? It goes into the ocean. Most of it, it just gets dumped into the sea. Like, I think the feds are like, I really love what Trump is doing against San Francisco, because I'm pretty sure the EPA is suing San Francisco for all of the drugs that's in the ocean. For the feds are literally suing San Francisco for water pollution because of all of the narcotics and medication in the oceans. So that's a big thing. And then recently too, they went after somebody who we thought had absolute immunity, which was the
Yeah.
was the director of public works. But it's already because it's
Yeah,
eight.
we got to wrap.
We gotta get
Do you have
going.
any final thoughts? I think we've made it very clear what churches need to do and talk through these rights and how to fight against absolute immunity in thorough detail. So, real quick, do you have any final thoughts before we end
No,
up this stream?
I mean, I wish I was more clear, because it seems like I don't know, like a lot of people might not have understood like the connection between absolute immunity and homelessness, and how to fight homelessness and all this other stuff. But
Well, we covered it in thorough detail in further episodes, and you guys also. I mean, was that your final thought? Because I'm gonna have to
wrap it up. Wrap it up.
But what I wanted to also say, guys, is revisit old episodes that we've had. There's over 100 episodes where we've talked about homelessness. We've talked about some of this other stuff. And I would encourage a lot of you to go back and watch some of those episodes with those titles, because it kind of gives you a better understanding. If you've been a long time listener, you'll probably get what we're saying. But these are all just a series of conclusions that have been built up after months and months of discussion. But thank you guys for tuning into this show. Good night. We'll be back next week, hopefully. We try to keep it to no longer than 3 hour stint, because people start to drop off.
Yeah. Oh, I know, but
I'll share your minds. Actually,
yeah. If you read my stuff on Minds, it's a little bit more thought out. It's when I write stuff, I just write it all out, and then you guys can research a lot of the stuff that we talk about. Because it's
got it. I'll just put it in the chat here.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat. So
people to start not fighting, but to really start embracing, like, and how to apply Christianity to everyday living. Because like when I laugh so much at Vicious E, because that was me. I used to be just like him, just talking crazy for no reason without really understanding what the Bible says, because he brought up things about, bailing out the banks and all this other stuff. But that's the whole point. When you don't have, Jesus, that's what happens. Because, because man, oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. But that's why, again, my weakness is I don't know the scripture, but I do know how to apply those two laws of Jesus into modern society, and how to make them to the courts, because you can't argue with scripture when you go to any court. The judge says, hey man, you can't do that. Although I will say this, did you know that they actually, every day of the impeachment, they lead with the prayer, and the chaplain will read from the Bible?
That's an interesting thought. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, they do. So like, I know they believe in God and Jesus, but but no one's gonna say anything. But you know what I mean? But that's what they do. But you just can't use the Bible as a way to fight the law. You just can't. So, but what you can do is understand those commandments and start applying how to fight absolute immunity, how to do all these different things, because it is our physical liberty. I mean, that's why like the impeachment is so interesting, because when you really do watch it, the chaplain, who is a general, usually it's a general, or an admiral, they'll read the Bible, they'll say a prayer, and then they do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then it's all good. But that's so crazy, because you would think people like, Omar, AOC, why are they doing that? That's so that, but because look, they know they got no power, and nobody wants to rock the boat that much, so they do it very slowly, and that's why, like, if I could do anything, that would be my thing, is to try to help teach people how to use the Christian commandments. I don't want to say philosophy or principle. It's the commandments. There's only 2 laws. It's real simple. It's not complicated. It's not 10. It's only 2. 2 commandments. We could use those 2 commandments in the law. We just got to tie physical liberty and loss of that physical liberty to our faith.
Cool.
Well, I was done. That was my final thoughts.
Appreciate you sharing that. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm gonna sign off because I'm starting to,
Yeah. 2 hours long time.
Yeah, no. Thank
really
you, guys. We'll upload this on Podbean and whatnot if you want to listen to the audio version. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another episode here. Take care, guys.
All right, cool.